Welcome everyone. Today's video is part one of a two-part series covering BFS rods. This first video is going to cover BFS trout rods, and the next one is going to cover BFS bass rods. Even if you don't fish for trout, I encourage you to watch this video just to be able to see a little bit what goes into BFS rods in whole. That way you can make the best selection for yourself. So if you want to see that, keep watching. Also comment down below what BFS rod that you have or that you plan on getting. Alright, so for this first video that's focusing on BFS trout rods, I'm going to go over a few different ways that I pick out my BFS trout rods. Price is rarely a first thought for me. I like to see what's going to be the best tool for the job, and then I can sort through different prices and such, which a lot of times I tend to try to look toward the budget side of things just because there is very little gap, which I'll get into a little bit, between the budget and the enthusiast level stuff. But to start off with, you have materials. So you have fiberglass, which is fairly common for BFS trout rods. And then you have graphite, like say fiberglass, and then graphite, which I'll go over in a little bit. But I'm not going to go into too much detail because I do have a video that goes over this topic specifically, just going over materials, pros and cons and such. I'll link that one down below, or it'll also be up top as well. So first and foremost, I like to look into the size of the fish that I'm typically going to be catching. And something to consider as well is if you have mixed streams, like a lot of the streams you fish at, you might catch brook trout that are say 6 to 10 inches, and then boom, a 20-inch brown hits. That's something that's a little bit of versatility. That's something you have to factor in for yourself, kind of like the chances of that happening. Now, if it's just going to be a once in a while thing, don't even focus on the bigger fish. Just take it for what it is. If a big fish hits like that, just hopefully your drag works and you're able to run downstream with it. But if you do have a lot of that versatility of going, say you catch brook trout, rainbow trout, brown trout, all kind of mixed in, you definitely want to look for a little bit of versatility in your setup. And especially because you're only going to be bringing one rod, which if you're going to be hiking in, you're going to want to look at packability. You see a lot of 2-piece rods or even 3 or 4-piece rods. Just the things to keep in mind is that the more connections that your rod has, sometimes your taper can be a little bit flatter as far as like right here. This is where this rod connects, bending. You can see there's a very slight, you can't even really tell it with this type of rod, but flat spot there. Now if you do that 3-4 times, especially up near the tip, it can feel a little bit segmented when you're casting. It's a very small difference, but it is something that you can tell. All right, so something before we get into ratings, which they can be a little bit skewed a little bit. Rod description is almost more important than ratings sometimes, at least to me. So if you see a rod, like this is the Shimano Trout 1 NS. This is that mystery rod that I was posting about on Instagram, if you saw that post. The Trout 1 NS, the NS means native special. So sometimes you'll see in the descriptions or maybe even the title of the rod, it'll say something about native or native special. This one says native performance. This is the Palms Egeria. This is a fiberglass rod. Or you'll see something that says something about headwaters, or if the rod is designed to be fishing headwaters fishing, it's going to be a little bit lighter and powered. Also, sometimes that translates to a little bit softer taper as well, just to give a sporting chance to those a little bit smaller fish that you would find way upstream, away from the tailwaters, where like a lot of the transient fish like steelhead and such that roam through there. So I'll read off this rod's ratings, and then I guess I'll show the taper of it a little bit. It's like a fast action rod. So when you bend the taper down, you'll feel like the tip is fairly light, and then when you put a little bit more force, that's what you will feel. It does bend into the midsection a little bit, but it's pretty stout through here, which is, especially with tubular graphite rods, you will feel that that's pretty common, which isn't a bad thing. It's just something that you're going to be looking for. Now the carbon rods will be lighter in hand, but don't let that deter you from getting a fiberglass rod, because even though, I mean, this is 4'7", this is 4'4", I can feel the difference in my hand. It's not going to translate to a performance increase like it would for, like, say, a bass fishing rod, for example. Just because they're so light, and yes, the percentage difference could be a lot, but it's only like a half of an ounce sometimes, or it could be a little bit more depending on the model, but you're not going to feel that in hand. So with this rating, It's rated 3 to 8 pound line, 2 to 9 gram lures. Now with this Daiwa Silver Creek AGS, this isn't the glass progressive, this is an older rod. It's carbon. This is a 5'2" light powered rod, so it's same. This is a 4'7" light powered. This one's rated 2 to 9 grams, 2 to 6 pound line. So this one's actually rated lighter. I mean, with this rod, it is significantly more backbone. Now this one, although it's in their Silver Creek lineup, it's not specifically a Headwaters rod at all. Like, I think the description, if I remember correctly, there are some that say something about Headwaters in the same lineup, but this one does not. And it got significantly more backbone. I actually like this. This is one of my favorite BFS rods for panfish, actually. I will use it if I know that there's going to be a little bit bigger fish. And it's super sensitive. I like it. But it is a little bit too much backbone for most of my trout fishing. But even though this has lighter ratings, because this is native special and it's designed to fish like headwaters or like some of those like native smaller Japanese trout, this rod is actually going to feel lighter. If you see a rod's description that says like twitching master or something about twitching lures, it's inherently going to have a little bit faster action. So like you'll have a noticeable tip section like this, and then when you hook up with that fish, it will give under pressure. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're looking for a really soft, like fun bend. Those twitching models are going to be a little bit faster action. Jumping over, just one thing that the rod's power rating doesn't always translate to having, they're not always linear. So this right here, this is a 4'4" extra ultralight, rated 0.8 grams to 3.5 grams, 1 to 4 pound line. And it's a light for a fiberglass rod, like in power. It has a faster tip, and then it bends down into a midsection, and eventually, if you put some force into it, bends down all the way to like the butt section. So that's going to be really nice. It's going to give you some versatility, but also it does not feel like an extra ultralight powered rod. I can tell you that right now. But it will be nice for brook trout if you do fish for a lot of brook trout, hiking, and you use a lot of, say, minnow style lures. I'd suggest getting this. I have used it a couple times. I haven't caught any fish with it, but it does feel really nice twitching. I'd say from like 4 gram minnows and down. I've casted. Actually, I'm not going to spoil that. I do have a video coming out in about a week covering this rod, but it does feel really nice twitching minnows in fast current and slow current, which sometimes fiberglass rods, such as my custom one I've been fishing with for a couple years, it can feel a little bit sloppy if you're in fast current, especially with a little bit of water you're trying to twitch. It can feel a little bit sloppy with that, but this Aguirre rod does feel really nice for that. I look at what the components of the rod are. So a lot of times you'll see some very high-end boutique JDM trout rods, which look very, very nice, and you think, oh, that has to be just like perform, twice as good as a different rod. Let's say one of these ones on the table. Something to consider is that some of those rods have like Fuji titanium guides with like torazite inserts, which are very expensive, and yes, they do perform a little bit better, but you're not going to really see the difference in performance that much with a trout rod, just because they are shorter. So those lighter guides aren't going to make as big as difference as if you have like a 7-foot bass rod with bigger guides. That guide material is going to make a pretty big difference. So here, like most of the BFS trout rods they're going to find have, like your mid-level Fuji guides, like the Fuji K series guides, which are pretty good. Stainless. They'll have stainless steel frames, maybe some sick inserts, or even alkanite, which I've found just to be just fine. A lot of times I find that the JDM rods, they're built off the blank first, and then the components can add the different pricing and like quality tier. So that is something to look at if you're looking at a rod and it has a bunch of high-end components, or like let's say even cork, like they have triple 5A cork. It's really nice cork, but that's what you're paying for as well. So with these a little bit more budget-friendly rods, I find that you get really good bang for your buck. Like the Aguirre is like, I think it's like $140, and that's with free shipping from Digitaka. And the Trout One NS is about the same as well. That could change depending on like the model that you look at. I know that in this Aguirre series, they have a whole bunch of different models. So if you do fish for, let's say, mostly like rainbows or brown trout that are like, 14, let's say 10 to 18 inches usually. They do have like an ultralight or a light version that I think would be better than this extra ultralight. But if you fish for brook trout or like some smaller stocked rainbows or something, this rod feels really nice. All right, so that goes into taper. If you fish a lot of jigs, I know trout fishing, it gets a lot of the love from like minnow style lures twitching really fast in streams, which a faster taper could help with that responsiveness, especially if you like to use monofilament line. Like I like to use monofilament line most times, but a lot of times I'm fishing on short lines, so it doesn't make as big a difference. Now, if I was casting really far and the current's fast, sometimes the current can push your line. So you're going to want a faster action rod to be able to hurry up and pick up that line when you go to set the hook, and it has a little bit more backbone like this Trout 1 NS. You're going to be able to get through the slack of that line and also like pull that line tight through the current. If you have a softer rod, let's say like my custom glass rod here, it can be a little bit more difficult. Now you can offset that by using some braided line, but if you fish in cold environments, braided line is more apt to freezing than monofilament, for example. So sometimes it takes, you order the rod, and you might feel, you go out with your favorite line, let's say if it's braided line, for example, and you're using this Trout 1 NS, and you feel that a lot of your fish are getting hooked very close to the front of their lips, like not a very good hook set, or the fish are getting off and it's shaking next to you. Something you can do is just switch over to monofilament line, and that might be enough of the difference for that fish to be able to grab your lure better, which then gets you better hook sets, and you can also get a little bit of cushioning when you're fighting that fish that's right next to you. All right, so as far as pricing, I haven't found a strong correlation between price and performance. I know there is a little bit, and you can feel some of the refinement with these BFS rods, but for most people's fishing, I'd say when you get around that, say $100 to $200 price point, that's where most of your bang for your buck's going to be. Even like the Sunora Aries, for example. This is one of my favorite BFS rods, and I have a whole bunch of different JDM tackle. And this rod's one of my favorite ones for what I do. It's durable, it's solid carbon, so it does have its drawbacks as far as it being a little bit heavier, but it is durable and does have a nice soft taper that helps protect. I'm using like really short hooks, like number 10 hooks on some like the Rapala CD1, for example. But I found that jig fishing, my hook set can be a little bit weak on that. So that's something, if you fish for a lot of like small jigs or even some floating lures, having a faster action rod definitely helps. And twitching is not that great with this rod, I should say that. That's most of what your taper is going to be tailored toward, is that the twitching. All right, so kind of going without saying, the carbon rods are going to be more sensitive. I would not suggest getting a fiberglass rod if you plan on fishing jigs a lot. Just inherently how fiberglass rods are, they don't lead to the most sensitivity. Now you can get some acceptable sensitivity if you do use braided line, especially if your fiberglass rod has some give to it. It's actually not a bad setup if you throw those once in a while like I do. But most times I'm using moving baits, and I like to have a little bit of that cushion in my system, whether I'm using a faster action rod that has monofilament line with it, or if I'm using a softer rod like my custom glass rod. I'll run this with braid just so it tightens up the taper a little bit, if that makes any sense. All right, hopefully this video is helpful to you. I know that I've been through the ringer of going through buying different BFS rods and being let down based on it was too fast, too slow, or whatever. Some key takeaways is being flexible with your line choice to tailor for the best fishing performance for yourself. It's a way that you can either give your rod or you give your setup more power, or a little bit less power. And also reading the descriptions on those JDM rods if you're looking on the JDM side of things. And then of course your rod material as well. So if you want to see more videos like this, comment down below what you want to see. And also I do want to know what type of rods that you guys are using, and comparing it to other rods that you have, just so we can read the comment section, and we can use that information just so for everybody can have more informed way that they can purchase rods. So I would appreciate if you did comment down below what BFS Trout rods that you've been using. Thanks for watching.